Tanareth was a demigod, a champion of light, born from the seed of the god Kadros. He was, quite possibly, the greatest demigod to have ever lived, and he was praised by all who came into contact with him. In the thousands of years that he walked the earth, he had led armies, ruled nations, and kept the peace, all while the gods lounged atop Mount Ragnar, watching the world from afar. This did not matter to Tanareth, who led his life with honor and dignity, doing the gods proud wherever he could. With his shield, he protected the people who followed him, and, with his sword, he carved justice through the arrogant blasphemers who would stand against the gods. His righteous light shined brighter than any other of Kadros' children, and his conviction was stronger than the thickest chains. But every few thousand years, the gods would bore of their current location and continue on to shape more of the world, create more lands and inhabitants. So, wherever the gods went, so too did Tanareth. For 3 millennia he defended Uzorah, and before that it was the long-forgotten lands to the east, and then, when the gods sailed west and created the lands of Orica, he sailed with them. In Orica, the people who left Uzorah began to settle as the gods weaved their mighty magic, shaping mountains and valleys, growing forests and jungles, filling rivers and lakes, and populating it all with races new and old. Tanareth was the first to lend aid to these people and, along with those who followed him, helped them achieve what he helped so many others to achieve. For his service, the gods rewarded him. Tanareth was crowned king of Istravia, where he would rule over the southwestern portion of Orica, from the city of Istra, aided by a court of his brothers, sisters and cousins. But this would be his undoing, for he was now able to observe the world from a single point, rather than shifting from battle to battle in a haze of blood and victory. As a king, he could no longer solve every problem with his sword. He had to start listening to his people, and his people had something to say. For years, he spent his time listening to the same old story of blasphemous accusations of the gods, and each was either sent away or punished, depending on the severity of their heretic claims. Some said that the gods did not love them, that they created the world just to watch their people suffer. Some claimed that the gods were actively harming them, sending monsters to feed on their people. All of these claims were unsubstantiated. That is, until these creatures started scratching at Tanareth's door. It was rumoured that bands of gnolls from the northwestern provinces had come south with enormous and deadly beasts. The Volcaris. The Volcaris was similar, in a way, to the Minotaur of Uzorah, bipedal with a bovine-like body, tail and ears, but the similarities ended there. Instead of horns, they had great stag-like antlers, shaggy wolf-like fur, and the fangs of a carnivore. Unlike the Minotaur, the Volcaris was simply a beast, an animal relying on instincts. But the Volcaris was a deadly animal, standing at 6 feet tall on all fours, but almost 10 feet on its hind legs. One evening, on the way home from a hunt, Tanareth was ambushed by several of these beasts. From the tree line, 3 came hurtling towards the party, with a pack of gnolls running out behind. One of the Volcaris charged Tanareth's horse, with him just managing to clear it before the creature's antlers impaled his steed, before shaking it free. The result was the same for 2 more riders, but one was not lucky enough to escape the Volcaris' attack. Tanareth already had his estoc drawn, and the gnolls were now on top of the party. In came a spear, which was easily dodged, before his sword plunged into the attacker's chest. Tanareth slid out the bloody blade, ready to parry the next assault, and slice the perpetrator's throat, before taking the hand of the next, then the leg of another. But the roar of the Volcaris reminded him of the real threat. He used his powers to create a ball of light in his free hand, whereupon it pulsed across the battlefield, temporarily blinding all it came into contact with. With everything else stunned, at least for a few seconds, he used the ball of light to eviscerate the nearest gnoll, causing his body to burn and blister before flaking away. His next target was the Volcaris that killed his horse. Tanareth sprinted at it, hurdling the bodies that littered the ground. His armor of silver and gold shone as lightning through the air as he ran. His long, golden hair flowed behind him so gracefully, whilst the orb of light illuminated his godlike features. Tanareth was almost upon the Volcaris as the beast began recomposing itself. Its eyes fell to the demigod and roared a blood-curdling roar, but Tanareth did not slow. With a battle cry, he lunged for the beast, his light-touched hand ready to claim the life of another foe. However, as Tanareth made his attack, the light did nothing. Before he could even realize what was going on, the beast swiped at him, knocking him back several feet and taking a gouge out of his armor. As he gazed upon the Volcaris, his eyes widened, his expression aghast, as the white glowing symbols of Kadros himself became visible on the creature. His small hunting party was starting to fall. Nearly half of the 24 with him had already been slain, yet the gnolls kept coming, and the 3 Volcaris were still standing. The beast that had knocked Tanareth back still glowed with the marks of Kadros, and, with another target in its sight, a blast of white light exited its mouth. Tanareth laid, dumbfounded, as the same power as his own crashed into one of his soldiers, the light blistering his skin as he died in agony. Tanareth could no longer hold back. The gnolls were not particularly challenging to fight, but the Volcaris were incredibly difficult beasts to face, and it was taking his people everything they had just to dodge its attacks. The Child of Light gripped his sword, where runes that ran down the fuller glowed a bright, piercing white. The same symbols as the Volcaris began to appear on his exposed arms, neck and face. With blinding speed, Tanareth launched himself across the battlefield, slicing through several gnolls, freeing his people up to help with their comrades. With an angry growl, he turned his attention to the Volcaris, who was charging another attack, the inside of its mouth glowing ready. As Tanareth sprinted at the beast, it let out the blast, straight for the man. However, the light was his domain, and Tanareth simply caught it before sending it hurtling towards another gnoll who could have never seen it coming. With his superior speed and strength to regular mortals, Tanareth leapt into the air several feet with a blade like white fire slicing clean through the monster's neck, its head dropping to the floor with a thud. Still in the air, Tanareth saw an opportunity, kicking the Volcaris' body, allowing it to crash upon 2 more gnolls. With most of the attackers now defeated, the party could focus on the 2 remaining Volcaris, with half a dozen managing to bring down the second with arrows and spears. But the third still remained, and many had been crushed by its enormous form, impaled on its antlers, or missing limbs from its blood-flowing maw. Tanareth turned his attention towards it, and it too began to glow with the symbols of Kadros. Angry, Confused, and having lost too many already, Tanareth made one final charge for the beast, knocking another blast of light out of the way before sliding beneath it, removing the hand that clawed at him and slicing the tendons on one of its hind legs. The Volcaris shrieked in pain, falling to its side, whereupon Tanareth plunged his blade through its head. With the events of the forest troubling his mind, Tanareth stood before the god's palace in the divine city of Emarvelar. The tales of his people had proven true, and he now knew that it had been going on for a very long time. Beside him stood members of his council, who were also born of the gods. Medela, a daughter of Kadros and half-sister to Tanareth, and Tidrosin, a son of Nephrys, the water god.
"Are you sure you're ready to do this, cousin?"
Tidrosin whispered, slowing slightly as he tugged on Tanareth's arm.
"What is there to discuss?"
Tanareth countered, his mouth almost pulling back into a snarl.
"Our own father has sent his beasts into our lands, rampaging across the countryside, unchecked. Just thinking of all the years we ignored the rumors makes me sick."
As Tanareth's voice grew louder, his tone harsher, Tidrosin closed in on his cousins, a look of fear and caution on his face.
"Do not forget where we are,"
Tidrosin warned, pulling them ever closer.
"I am in agreement with the pair of you, but a lack of caution will conclude with far bleaker results."
Medela pulled away, growling to herself, wrenching her cousin's hand from her shoulder. She was, by far, the most aggressive of the three, and Tidrosin figured that Tanareth's outburst was most probably riled up by her. Both looked to Tanareth, a pained yet stoic expression on his face as he recomposed himself. But the question remained in their hearts. Did Tanareth have the courage to face his father? Could he keep his composure and debate his point with grace and poise? Unfortunately, the meeting did not result in a satisfactory conclusion, and the god's indifference peeled Tanareth's patience away far more than the most heated argument.
"These beasts are attacking my lands, my people. Beasts with your mark. My mark. Why?"
Tanareth was horrified when Kadros cited no other reason than boredom, a way to amuse himself. He looked to the other gods, hoping just one of them would speak reason, but all was silent. Was it that they shared his mind on the subject, or were they too scared to oppose him? It mattered not, for they had shown their true colours. Tanareth stormed out of the room, with Medela and Tidrosin furiously seething beside him. As a final statement of his disgust, he removed the severed head of the Volcaris from a sack attached to his horse and cast it before the palace doors before mounting up and leaving the city. It was a 2-week ride back to Estravia, 2 weeks to stew upon what his father said, as well as all of the things he did not say. There had been no apology, no assurance of such a thing not happening again. 2 weeks is a long time for anger and bitterness to spread, to cloud the mind and steer you against your better judgment. On the ride home, with a full guard at his back and 2 of his kin at his side, Tanareth slaughtered every knoll camp they came across, just to send a message written in blood. It didn't even matter if they were hostile or not. Every living soul perished. His father was bored, content to bring death to the people of Orica for pure amusement. So, Tanareth would provide him with entertainment that he could not ignore. There must have been 1,000 bodies by the time they reached Estravia. Perhaps he had been a little overzealous, However, the message had been made clear, and no one would be crazy enough to attack Tanareth's kingdom, at least for a while. In a haze of anger and betrayal, Tanareth sent word to the other rulers of Orica, the Queen of Ishana in the southeast, the King of Elanar in the northwest, and the Guardian of Elgaros in the northeast. His hope was that each of them had been made to deal with the aftermath of the gods' boredom, and would rally to him in a grand rebellion. The King of Elanar was closest to the city of the gods, and was therefore too afraid to stand against them. The Queen of Ishana believed Tanareth a heretic, a traitor to his gods and his kin. The final word was from Garrod, the Guardian of Elgaros, who agreed with Tanareth's sentiment, but was not about to declare war on the gods, when he himself commanded no army. Even the dwarf king, Morbrin Drakenslur, who had previously defied the gods, would not aid his cause, stating that his fight with them was done, and he wished to live in peace with his people. This development did not please Tanareth, but it had alerted the gods to his hijinks, courtesy of the Queen of Ishana. The message that followed was swift, carried by a griffin of Emma Velar. The magnificent beast warned Tanareth of what his rebellion would bring, and if he truly wanted to protect his people, then he would lay down his arms and grovel to his father for his slight. Tanareth even considered it. He had served his father for 8,000 years. Could he really throw away such a service over a few mortal lives? He knew he could not win. Even with a court of demigods on his side, he feared he could not even take on a single one of the real gods, whose blood ran diluted through their veins. He wondered what he even hoped to achieve by standing against them. But how could he even look his people in the eyes if he backed down now? If he looked the other way, he would become as bad as they, and who would stand up for his people, if not him? The decision was made, but Tanareth knew he could not allow himself the option to go back on it. And so, with a flourish of his sword, he sliced off the two front talons of the griffin. A piercing shriek filled the castle grounds, alerting all in the area to the commotion. A small crowd began to form as the griffin thrashed around in pain.
Go now. Tell my father that I will not allow his apathy to be the cause of my people's suffering.
With another shriek of both pain and anger, the griffin took off, not looking back as it rose into the sky and out of Tanareth's vision. Tidrosin appeared at his side, with a stoic expression on his face as he, too, stared after the god's messenger.
Looks like there's no going back then.
No, I suppose there isn't,
Tanareth replied grimly. He looked to his cousin, unable to read his expression. Had he been having second thoughts? Had he just condemned his own kin to death for his own selfish desires? Tidrosin gave no indication either way, but it would not be long before the full wrath of the gods would be unleashed upon the city, and Tanareth had to be prepared. The days passed with a suspicious quiet. Tanareth moved the people of his city into his palatial fortress, its numbers filling every wing, spilling out into the grounds, and even into the catacombs. The army maintained a constant vigil, ever on high alert. Tanareth commanded 15,000 strong, with the rest of the able-bodied men and women adding 40,000 to their numbers, arming themselves with whatever they had. Tanareth attempted to keep face, to encourage where he could, and maintain the general morale of his people. Yet he knew that even a force of 100,000 was folly against the gods, the beings that crafted and shaped the world itself. In truth, he did not know if they could even be harmed by mortal weapons. No, the gods would split their defences as a bolt of lightning splits a tree. They would cleave through his legions and massacre his people, and then, when the last man falls, an example would be made out of him and his kin, and no one else would ever stand against them. In one final act of desperation, Tanareth went to the temple of his father and prayed before his likeness.
Father, I know you can hear me. I know I cannot defeat you. I would never be so bold as to assume I could. But I will remain by my people, those who you allow to be slaughtered for sport and entertainment. Do the gods no longer love their creations? Does my father no longer love his sons and daughters? It would seem we are at an impasse. But if my death brings even the most minute amusement, then I will be proud to have served a purpose one final time. You still have our love, Father, even in war.
There was no reply, nor had there ever been. It was a statue, nothing more. But Tanareth caught a glimpse of something in its eyes, and he knew that his father had been watching and listening. But what were his words worth? It would not be long before he found out. 2 weeks to the day that he received his message from the Griffin, Tanareth looked out from the battlements, only to find an army at his gates, stretching across the landscape, tens of thousands, an ocean of bodies, with the gods at the head, though one was strangely absent. Adrian, the flame goddess, was nowhere in sight. Not that it mattered, for even one god could obliterate the defences. Or Thanos could pull a mountain from the earth, destroying the land's very foundations. Nephrys could summon a great tsunami, drowning all inside the fortress. But this wasn't their way. This was a show of faith, to prove that they still held mortal devotion, despite their heinous acts, that they would follow blindly and loyally. Tanareth took a deep breath, and time seemed to slow as Kadros gave the order to attack. His prayer had meant nothing. Arrows rained from both sides, and hundreds died in the first minute. With a single swing of his great hammer, Kadros shattered the main gate, allowing the wave of invaders to crash upon the defending forces. Tanareth held the line for a while, until the gods unleashed their beasts into the fray. Volcaris, manticores, and even beasts Tanareth had never seen before began pushing back the ranks, striking fear into the hearts of civilians and soldiers alike. Tanareth leapt across the battlefield, carving up beast after beast, unable to use the light against any of them. However, the attacking soldiers had no such blessing upon them, with all those born of Kadros focusing their magic on them, whilst the other demigods fought back the monsters. Tidrosin drowned his foes with unending torrents of water, whilst a son of Elemis crushed his entangling vines. A daughter of Waius unleashed a hurricane towards the enemy, blasting back soldiers and beasts both. Tanareth continued flitting along the lines, as if he were flying, every swipe of his sword sending another soul to the afterlife. But the assault was not over, and the waves of enemies seemed endless. And then he appeared. Standing at 10 feet tall, Kadros' powerful form stood in the gateway, his mighty hammer glowing with self-righteous glory. The gods had entered the fray, and Tanareth felt an ice-cold chill run down his spine. The grounds had been claimed. the bodies of the dead strewn across them in their thousands. The fortress had been breached, and its halls ran red. The gods had not spared their own children, with Tanareth's court of 25 demigods falling to only 13. The few still living had been pushed back to the catacombs, and over 60,000 had been reduced to a measly few hundred, who cowered behind their noble leader who, now wounded and exhausted, still held himself between them and his ever-encroaching father, feebly batting at him with his sword. Unable to even stand up straight, Tanareth addressed Kadros one last time, through a haze of blood.
Go on. Finish it. I hope this bloodshed was amusing enough for you, Father.
But Kadros did not finish it. The god of light held out his glowing hammer, its rays enveloping Tanareth, as well as his brothers and sisters, the golden symbols of their father shining brightly on their bodies.
You squander my sacred light, all to protect these pitiful mortals. Pathetic. You were so much greater. You were all so much greater. Now I will take the light from you.
The markings dulled, as Kadros sapped the light from their beings, leaving their bodies greyed, their eyes lustreless, and their golden hair faded white. Kadros' hammer fell to his side as he addressed all of the remaining demigods, his brothers and sisters standing ominously behind, their eyes glowing with an intense hatred.
I banish you now from the light. You will no longer bask in its splendor, and its once inviting warmth will burn you to ash. As you have turned your back upon the light, your only friend shall be the darkness. I have slaughtered your heathen followers, but I leave the task's end for you. Their blood, which you sought to protect, will be your life force, and you will hunger for it eternally. Your desires will be bestial, and you will rip and tear their flesh for your sustenance. This is the will of your gods. So be it.
In a final act, Kadros raised his hand, his palm glowing as he muttered an incantation before he and his kin retreated from the room, with Orphanos raising a slab of rock and earth into the doorway. As the echoing footsteps grew faint, Tanareth fell defeatedly to a knee. All the while the cries and whimpers of terrified citizens reverberated through the catacombs. Several angry screams and roars filled the room as the gravity of their predicament began to settle. A son of Orphanos approached the blocked doorway, attempting to undo the work his father did, but he felt nothing. He realized, as Tanareth already had, that their powers had been stripped away or blocked. Tanareth, king of Istravia, had failed, as he knew he would. But he did not expect this, to be trapped until death, cursed to feed on those he swore to protect. Not wishing to be the first to turn against his people, Tanareth shuffled into the darkness of the catacombs, hoping his architects had built other exits. But escape had been rendered a fruitless pursuit, for the only other exit had already been sealed. The realization was billowing in like a fog, and he wondered if he was kinder to end his people's lives quickly, cleanly, and as painlessly as possible. Tanareth turned back when a strange feeling washed over him, and he almost felt a tugging in a different direction. Intrigued by the feeling, he continued on until he saw an ominous figure at the end of a long, final hall. Straining his eyes, he identified it as a statue he had not seen in thousands of years. He cautiously shifted closer towards it, his eyes fixed upon it. For a brief second, he could have sworn there was a strange shimmer across its eyes. The great statue's likeness was of Azin, the goddess of shadow, who Tanareth had not seen in person since the days of the Old World, over 5,000 years prior. Desperate and out of options, Tanareth knelt before the altar of his long-forgotten aunt and hoped beyond hope that she would listen to his prayer.
Oh, Lady Azin, I plead for your aid. I know not why you parted from your brothers and sisters, but perhaps you saw something in them that I had been blind to until it was too late. For the sin of loving my people, I and my kin have been condemned to waste away in the catacombs of my palace, cursed to hunger for the blood of those I tried to protect. I beseech you, in my time of need, I offer myself to you, my servitude for my people's freedoms. I fear we do not have long left.
Tanareth knelt in silence, with no way of knowing if his prayer would be answered. However, another shimmer cast across the statue's eyes, and he knew that he'd been heard. He stared into the darkness of the catacombs, wondering how long it would take the hunger to consume him and his kin. How long they could stave it off before it drove them mad. A lone figure wandered the ruins of the Astravian palace. The grounds had become a boggy marshland with how much blood had been shed. Tens of thousands of bodies remained strewn in every direction. Their drained, pale faces were a terrifying visage. The man continued into the broken, crumbling palace. He seemed unfazed by the carnage, only ever stopping to confirm he was heading in the right direction. He had short, dark hair poking out from under a black hood, his eerie purple eyes peering out. He wore scale armor under a leather breastplate, with steel gauntlets and greaves. On his back hung a long, tattered cloak, with an elegant longsword sheathed on his right side, while a great tome hung on his left by a chain. Eventually, he stopped in a stairwell, where a soft glow beckoned him down. As he descended, a soft hum accompanied the glow, and as he turned the corner, a snide smile curled into the corner of his mouth. In front of him was a doorway, filled with a raised patch of the floor, jutting out around 1.5 feet, and he expected the same on the other side. Next to the doorway was the source of the glowing, a circle of light surrounding various shapes and symbols. The mysterious man had already identified its purpose, deciding to leave it alone, at least for the moment. Reaching for his tome, the man opened it, running his fingers along the lines of text as he searched for the passage he needed. In a strange language, he began to chant, whilst holding his free hand out to the doorway. His voice reverberated through the stairwell and the empty halls beyond, as a soft tremble emanated through the ground around him. As he continued to chant, there was a crunch and scrape as the blockade began to shift, slowly receding into the ground from where it had been pulled. As the man finished his work, he peered into the inky black of the catacombs that lay ahead. As he began to light a torch, a light scuttling could be heard from within. His first steps were cautious, pointing his torch in each forward direction before fully entering. The air was stale and dead, with all manner of foul smells tainting it. The sound of scuttling continued in the dark, and even a sharp hiss echoed through the halls. Fixed stone columns lined either side of the room, with ornate coffins laid within the walls themselves. There was heavy blood smear across the stone floor, most of it dried. Whatever happened, it had done so days ago. As the man continued, he felt eyes staring from the darkness, yet nothing attacked, or even made their presence known. Possibly a fear of the flame kept them at bay. But the fire had attracted more than whatever lurked in the shadows. Before the man could get too much farther, he heard a whispering, then spotted the vague shapes of a group up ahead. The man sighed as he heard the gasps of fear-fueled excitement, and the sudden tapping of feet began to approach. Unfortunately, whatever eyes had settled on him had shifted to the growing rabble. The group quickened their pace, the noise growing, with some sobbing loudly as they went. They were almost upon him, but he finally saw what had been following him. They were withered versions of their former selves, hunched over husks, with white hair and greyed skin. The glimpse was barely a couple of seconds, but the man realized that they were heading to the back of the group, ready to pick them off from behind. But they had not even noticed that they were now being hunted. The group held a dozen or so, and all looked exhausted. They broke into a sprint as they neared the man, with the weaker ones falling behind. Easy prey. As the first few passed the man, turning to face the rest, gasps of horror splintered the air as two at the back were pounced upon, their heads being cracked on the floor, their blood spilling out onto the stone. The man continued on as the hunters attempted to drag the corpses away from the light of the torch. With around a dozen or so at his back, the man shifted position in pursuit of one of the attackers. A shrill screech left its lips as it cowered from the torch, swiftly slinking back into the darkness, leaving its kill behind. The other, however, was continuing to clamp its jaws around its victim's neck, tearing off chunks with every bite as it slurped down flesh and blood. The mysterious man was quick in his next move. After hanging his torch in a ring on a nearby column, he darted silently towards the gaunt, pale assailant. Without a sound, he took it completely by surprise, kicking it onto its back and landing a knee in its chest. It screeched and writhed, but to no avail, and the man was finally able to get a good look at it. Its skin had greyed, its hair whitened. He saw the faint symbols of Ophanos upon him. It was a sad sight, such that a great and powerful son of the earth god could fall so far. His nails had become long and jagged, with pieces missing from his time scrabbling about on the floor. This once proud demigod had withered and weakened, his eyes dilated to their maximum. However, it flinched away from the light, so at least he hadn't lost his sight. The man pulled a length of rope out of a satchel that he pulled from under his cloak and began tying the broken creature up. The man straightened, coiling the excess rope around his hand, and started to drag it into the darkness. He stopped only to signal for one of the survivors to pick up his torch, while he pulled out another, lighting it on the former. With two torches and one of their own being dragged behind, the withered lords and ladies of Istravia kept their distance, but were always present, their eyes glinting off the flames, their scuttling bodies disappearing back into the shadow. The catacombs were large, larger than he expected, and stopped briefly at a few turnings, but he swiftly made a decision at each one, as if something was guiding him. For the moment, he had one goal, and as he finally felt the sounds of his footsteps bouncing back off a dead end, a voice echoed from the dark.
Come no closer. There is no safety here. I have heard what my kin have become, as each fell to madness and bloodthirst, and I refuse to follow in their stead. Leave now. Please do not test the constitution of my will. Surely I will die soon.
The voice was weak, yet still demanded a presence, and even the husk being dragged along had stopped snivelling and twitching.
Tanareth, son of Kadros, and king of Estralia, your words have been heard. Your prayers are to be answered.
The man said proudly, as he pointed his torch forward, still unable to get a glimpse of the banished son of the light.
Who are you, stranger?
Tanareth asked suspiciously.
My name is Velnai, son of the Dark Lady Azin. I have been sent to you in your time of need, to drag you back from the edge of oblivion and reseat you as the king you are.
Before Tanareth could say another word, Velnai dragged the pitiful son of Orphanos in front of him, grasping across his head with one hand before removing his bonds.
My lady has seen fit to send you gifts. Your home is dark, and you are an exile of the light. So I offer you dark vision, a way to see, even in the blackest places of the world. You offer such a gift, yet you still wander my halls with a torch.
Tanareth muttered, prompting a slight chuckle from Velnai.
Fire wards away your hungering kin, and I did not wish to fight my way through and risk killing them. However, the flame is too narrowing, and I wish to look upon you, cousin.
Velnai handed the torch to one of the people behind him before closing his eyes. Upon opening them, they were fully black, and he peered into the darkness, now unabated by the light. Shapes came into focus as the shadow became its own strange form of light, and there he was. He sat upon the altar of Azin, leaning into her statue, one hand on its knee, the other on his estoc. He was not withered like the others Velnai had seen, but he had still lost considerable weight. Though he could not hear it, there was a slight tremble in his form.
Do you also mean to undo this curse?
Tanareth whispered from the shadows, leaning forward from the altar.
Even my mother's power cannot undo what the light has done. Such is the nature of the dark. What she offers are the means to live with the curse, and to regain control of the life you have lost. These gifts, however, come with certain changes. Do you accept this bargain?
If it allows me to protect my kin and my people, yes.
Then behold, as this pitiful creature becomes a glimpse into your future, the dark will no longer render him blind. His hearing will become enhanced. His bite will no longer tear flesh in order to feed. And his hunger will no longer drive him mad.
The moment his words stopped, a purple glow emanated from Velnai's palm, enshrouding his hand, and bathed the withered demigod in its soft light. His gaunt form began to reshape, his sagging skin beginning to fill back out. His eyes blackened as the dark vision took effect, and his ears elongated, coming to a point. His mouth opened as his canines stretched into fangs, and his erratic movement slowed and calmed. The son of Orphanus rose to his feet, staring at his hands and feeling his rejuvenated form. He could hear and see everything around him, yet felt no compulsion to feed on those who had followed Velnai. In the distance, he saw his king, immediately taking a knee before him.
These are the gifts I offer you and our kin, and with them you can rebuild your kingdom anew.
Yet we will still be confined to this dank hall. My kingdom is now my people's tombs, its walls their corpses.
Only during the day, cousin. But your people are not bound by that fate, and it will be they who do the rebuilding under my guidance. Perhaps even this child of Orphanus could lend his skills during the night.
Neither Arda nor the rest of us can use our powers. The gods took them back upon their exit.
Not taken. Blocked. There was a runic spell cast at the entrance of the catacombs. Easy to dispel, if you know what you're doing. But I was not going to do so until I knew you were still salvageable. When the task down here is complete, your powers will be your own again.
The figure of Tanareth shifted, his footsteps growing nearer, taking a knee before Velnai, son of Azin.
You and your mother have been kind, and I regret that my first prayer to her was in desperation. Please, what does your lady want in exchange for such gifts?
The goddess of shadow requires nothing, for she too knows the cruelty of her brothers and sisters. She asks only that you treasure her blessings, that you will rebuild and grow your kingdom back to its former glory from within the shadows.
How can this be achieved with but a few hundred of my people left?
There is one last gift that your new form will acquire, which I will explain later. But for now, allow me to complete your salvation and guide you to a glorious future.
In the days to come, Velnai would aid Tanareth in rebuilding his kingdom, and with Azin's final blessing upon him, his court would be bustling once again. But what was the final gift of the Dark Lady's bargain?
I came here to reform your curse into a blessing. And through you, this blessing can be spread. I gave you fangs so that you could drink the blood of the living without having to tear them apart. But these fangs have a second purpose. If you wish, you can turn others into beings like you, though not as powerful. They will be eternal like you, but will also share in your weakness to the light. They will serve your will, for as long as you command it.
And so Tanareth, king of Istravia, sat atop a new throne of stone and iron before the statue of his saviour and the saviour of his people. His prison would become his court, and though he remained in the shadows, his numbers would continue to grow, and the legend of Tanareth would endure. But he was not the king he once was, nor was he the light-wielding hero of old. He was now a creature of the night, motivated by the blood of mortals, and his abandonment by the gods had not left him unscarred. No, Tanareth was a different man, a different beast entirely, with much of his compassion being lost in the transformation. King Tanareth and his kin had become something new, something unknown to the outside world, and these men and women who were once demigods had been given a new name by the world: the vampires of Istravia.